Everyone's noticed it. Asian culture is trending. To be honest, this movement has been growing for years, but now it's reached a point where it's impossible to ignore. Even if you're not a fan of K-pop, anime, K-dramas, you still feel the presence of Asian culture all around you. And that brings up an important question. Are we truly celebrating this culture, or are we just projecting our fantasies onto it? The explosion of Asian culture in the West isn't just a passing trend, it's a cultural phenomenon. Its influence is subtle yet everywhere. It's in your feed. Films like Parasite, the meteoric rise of K-pop, Studio Ghibli animations, all of it has become part of our daily lives. But the bigger this interest gets, the more obvious another side of the story becomes, because there's a difference between admiring a culture and putting it on a pedestal built from stereotypes and fantasies. Today, I want to show you that hidden side of Asian pop culture's rise. Where does appreciation end, and where does fetishization begin? At first glance, it seems like Asian culture is finally being appreciated. People are learning new languages, flooding playlists with idol music, and crowding ramen shops and hot pot restaurants. But there's a subtle, and at the same time glaring, difference between appreciation and fetishization. The question is, why is it that certain Asian countries have become objects of fascination? South Korea, Japan, and to a lesser extent, China. That's no accident. Korea and Japan executed some of the most successful cultural export strategies targeted at the West. We rarely hear about people fetishizing Vietnam, Laos, the Philippines, or other less influential countries in East Asia. And ironically, fetishization doesn't just happen because of Asian culture's popularity, it happens alongside it. That's where terms like Koreaboo or Weeaboo come in. Words that might sound funny but reveal something deeper. We're talking about people who learn Korean or Japanese, alter their appearance, follow strict diets, and even say they feel like they were born in the wrong body. As if being Asian were a fantasy, not a lived reality. With the rise of the Korean wave, the Hallyu movement, the world began consuming music, beauty, fashion, and entertainment from Asia at an unprecedented scale. But with this consumption came idealization, the worship of the perfect face, the cute culture, the Asian way of being. That's when the gaze stops being curious and becomes fetishistic, when culture is edited, filtered, and reshaped to fit foreign expectations. And the most concerning part, this process isn't just imposed from the outside. Often it's the Asian cultural industries themselves that reshape their image to meet this demand. In other words, there is a self-commodification happening, a kind of institutionalized self-fetishization. Fetishization is when a person or group stops being seen as complex and becomes reduced to a set of stereotypical traits. Asian women, for example, are often portrayed as either innocent and submissive or as dragon ladies, seductive and manipulative. Films like The Last Samurai or Full Metal Jacket reinforce these tropes. Pop culture from East Asia introduced new portrayals, men who sing and dance with intense choreography and who play romantic, charming characters that go to great lengths for the woman they love, as seen in Korean, Chinese, and Japanese dramas. There are even women who travel to South Korea in search of the perfect man from K-dramas. To really understand what's happening, we need to talk about Edward Said and his concept of Orientalism. Said argued that the West built a fantasy version of the East, a place seen as exotic, mysterious, timeless, and often irrational, a perfect contrast to the West, which viewed itself as modern, logical, and superior. Fundamental to Orientalist fantasy, Sayed wrote, is the assumption that the East is incapable of defining itself. And for a long time, that was the dynamic. But what happens when Eastern nations decide to embrace that fantasy and use it to their advantage? That's self-Orientalism. When a country adopts and promotes the stereotypes the West created about it, realizing that this exotic image is a powerful commodity, a form of soft power, cultural influence rather than military force. Let's look at Japan. After World War II, Japan desperately needed to rebrand its global image. The solution? The Cool Japan campaign. The government invested heavily in exporting pop culture, especially anime and manga. But here's the catch: anime characters mostly don't look Japanese by Western standards. They have big eyes, colorful hair, and features that are intentionally ambiguous, or mukokuseki, meaning without nationality. That's no accident. It's a brilliant strategy. By creating a visually unique but racially ambiguous world, anime becomes universally appealing. It sells a kind of virtual Japan, a fantasy anyone can enter without the complications of real Japanese society. That's Orientalism, packaged and sold as entertainment. South Korea took this strategy to the next level with K-pop. The K-pop industry is a machine designed to create the most perfect marketable product possible, the idol. Trainees go through years of intense training to reach a specific beauty standard, often including plastic surgery. Their public personas are carefully crafted, and their private lives, especially romantic relationships, are tightly controlled to maintain the illusion that they're available to fans. Idols become ideal products. They represent a version of Korea that is modern, talented, and flawlessly beautiful. The South Korean government saw this potential, and today it invests billions into promoting the Korean wave as its main tool of soft power. This strategy extends to tourism as well. Chinese tourism ads, for example, rarely show the bustling megacities full of life and modernity. Instead, they focus on mystical landscapes, ancient temples, and ethnic minorities in traditional dress. They sell a vision of a timeless China, frozen in a glorious past, exactly the kind of fantasy a Western tourist wants to consume. But large-scale cultural export demands standardization. You have to decide what represents a nation and what gets left out. What this all reveals is that being admired doesn't always mean being understood. The rise of Asian pop culture has brought visibility, pride, and opportunity, but also distortions and pressure. In seeking external validation, even the countries and individuals involved sometimes reinforce the same images they were trying to escape. The line between appreciation and self-fetishization becomes harder to define. Of course, listening to K-pop, watching K-dramas, or using Korean skincare doesn't make someone a fetishizer, but maybe the real question isn't, am I wrong for liking this? It's, what exactly am I liking and why? We've seen how the West built a fantasy of the East, and how, in response, East Asian nations learned to play that fantasy to their advantage. It's tempting to oversimplify and say it's all problematic, that it's just surrendering to stereotypes. But as we've seen, the truth is much more complex. To truly appreciate something takes more than consuming products, copying trends, or repeating foreign words. It requires listening, context, and above all, respect for the complexity beneath the surface. Asia is a continent of billions, with histories, struggles, contradictions, and cultures that deserve to be seen beyond the Western storefront. By mastering the Western game on their own terms, these nations have reached levels of global influence once unimaginable. But at what cost? The price seems to be a constant simplification of identity. Culture becomes product. Appearance becomes essence. and nuance is traded for something easily consumable. Maybe the real question isn't whether self-fetishization is good or bad, but what comes next. Will this popularity, built on a foundation of fantasy, eventually lead to deeper, more authentic cultural exchange? Or are we doomed to consume increasingly simplified versions of each other without ever truly understanding the richness behind them?